Thank you everyone for joining us. I am Tom. I'm Tom, basically co-founder and CEO of Loops, which is basically kind of a platform that is focused on helping product growth and data teams maximize their KPIs. So instead of showing you dashboards and graphs and lines that go up and down, we actually surface concrete insights, concrete opportunities to improve your KPIs. And we work today with various companies to actually, basically what we are talking about today, to take all your data and actually convert it into actionable insights. We work today with B2B companies like Monday.com and B2C companies like AB and Bev, helping to improve things like conversion, retention, engagement, monetization, and so on. And we are here to talk about this, what we call the data kind of illusion, the illusion of basically that we are seeing across many companies that are not really able to translate all their data into actionable insights that move the needle. And it's not just kind of, by the way, it's not just kind of a problem of small companies. You know, before that, I used to work for a tiny company called Google, where we really struggled to leverage all our dashboards and data points to move the needle. And that's, I think, was one of the triggers for this webinar. Together with me is, I think, two Loops investors and big supporter of Loops, Casey Winters and Adam Fishman. I think, Adam, Casey, you can maybe start with introducing yourself before we go deeper into this kind of the data illusion space.
Okay, Adam's giving me the floor first, so thankful. Hey everyone, I'm Casey. I advise a lot of companies on how to scalably grow their businesses. Most recently, in operating role, I was the chief product officer at Eventbrite for 3.5 years. I used to lead the growth team at Pinterest, and I started the marketing team at GrowHub.
And I'm Adam Fishman, author of the newsletter that is in my name, Fishman AF newsletter. I am also an advisor currently to companies on product and growth. Last operating role I had was the chief product and growth officer of Imperfect Foods. I was just recently Resort Pass's interim chief product and technical officer. Been a VP of growth and product, and was a head of growth at Lyft when we launched the company and through the first few years of that product. So excited to be here.
Great. And actually, the reason why we brought Casey and Adam is because they've seen this problem firsthand. The challenges of basically kind of translate all this kind of like data that companies have, and you work with great companies that have tons of data, and they were able, I think, to learn from those challenges. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So just before we kick off, basically feel free to include in the Q&A section more questions that you have. Actually, there are like many of you already send us a question which we will include during the session. So I think we're ready to start. And let's kind of start with understanding the problem that we are talking about. So many companies, and we see that at Loops a lot. That was one of the reasons why I think we started this webinar. So many companies collect so many kind of data points and still really struggling to take this data, to leverage it into actionable insights that really move their bottom line, their KPIs. And maybe I want to start with kind of understanding why. What are the reasons for that, the way you see that? Who wants to go first?
Casey and I are busy telling each other to go first right now. So Casey, you can go. You got
I'll do this one. You got the next one.
Okay.
So look, the first thing to kind of keep in mind is that, Adam and I talk to a lot of companies. Certainly Tom talks to a lot of companies, and people inside those companies, and a lot of the feedback we get is like, oh yeah, everything is so screwed up. Like we don't have X, we don't have Y. People don't, know how to use data correctly. And like my response is like, that's every company I've ever joined. Like, are you going to like make efforts to try to improve it or not? So first off is don't think of it's a binary. Companies get this right, companies get this wrong. Pretty much every company starts having it wrong, and then smart, ambitious people decide to try to fix it, and they generally can make a lot of progress if they focus on it. I think some of the things Adam and I have seen is there's different types of barriers to being a truly healthy data-driven decision-making type of company. Some are cultural, some are technical, some are just organizational. But to just kick a couple off, One is, like the data is just inaccessible to the right decision makers. And that may be because the data is locked away in places that you need more technical skills than a lot of decision makers have. And the more data is inaccessible, the less likely it's going to be used to inform good decisions. Conversely, if you're able to make data very easily accessible, it's more likely it's going to get used. And there might be legal concerns as well as technical concerns that people kind of make data not easily accessible. Another one that I would like to highlight is you need some process orientation to actually use data in an effective way. So a lot of times, if you're shipping product changes, features, companies don't have the right ritual to review the data they've collected on that change and build kind of the learning feedback loop that tends to make a really great culture of high impact. So those are a couple I want to call out. Adam, what do you have?
Yeah, I think those are really good points. Another one that you and I talked about sort of in the prep for this is this idea of cargo culting other companies' processes and practices, and then wondering why that doesn't work. So for those of you who don't know that term, it basically means cargo culting basically just means like copying someone who has done something before and then assuming it's going to work for you. And I think we read a lot about the best, data infrastructure stories and how companies are really leveraging data to do well. And the reality is like those companies have gone through an incredible process and started, like you mentioned, Casey, with crap. And so what we're only reading is like where they ended up. And it's really hard to just start there if you're a company. And also what you need data-wise, the rituals that you need may not make sense given the size, the stage, the people in your company, the resources that you have to actually act on them. And so I think that's a big problem. And then the other one that I would add is, and this is not necessarily helped by some of our leaders, but this idea of a thing that I like to call motion over progress, which is, hey, we're moving forward, we're shipping, things are happening, look at this dashboard, look at this dashboard, look. And so that feels exciting, right? Look, there's lots of stuff happening. And the reality is that like, if you want to do true data gathering and insight development, you actually have to take some time and sit with data. And the dashboard is not an insight, right? A dashboard clues you into a direction that you should explore. But a lot of times companies don't give teams the space to get in there, and they don't reward the getting in there behavior. And so that's one of the other reasons that something like this can manifest itself in companies.
Yeah, I want to touch on something you mentioned there and go a little bit deeper, which is kind of if you're reading like Uber's perfect data infrastructure blog posts, which they've had thousands of engineers work on in your Series B startup, a lot of companies do get stuck in that perfect is the enemy of good. And instead of just putting one foot in front of the other to make their data infrastructure better and their reports better, they start trying to go super fancy. So definitely advise companies move in like a crawl, walk, run approach. And if you can't get basic insights on conversion, you probably shouldn't be trying to build a fancy machine learning model to predict which email people are going to open. Start at the basics, get more sophisticated over time, and only get sophisticated if it's worth it. Given how your particular, growth model works, things like that.
Yeah, I think these are really great points. And I think, to just make it a bit more practical, I think you have great examples of those kind of like challenges of from the companies you work for. And I don't know, we'll talk about the frameworks and the processing and the solutions, but I actually want to, in the context of what we just said, want to talk about the challenges that you faced, like those kind of learnings that you had from the companies that you work for in light of those tons of challenges that you just described.
Yeah, I can go here. I'll give kind of an example that goes to this idea of motion versus progress and how you can and where doing real data work and developing deep insights takes time. I've talked in some forums about this product that we built at Patreon, which is a place where I was VP product and growth. That was around helping creators overcome this plateau in their earnings. And so the data, the like surface level data was, hey, creators have a plateau in their earnings that comes about a year or 18 months into their tenure on the platform. Great, cool. We know that this exists. What we had to do to uncover that was the following. Manually look at creators' pages to look at those who overcame the plateau, see if we could reverse engineer what they did, develop surveying and actually interview and talk to a couple dozen creators to figure out what did you actually do to overcome this, come up with some solution ideas based on that plus the data, find willing participants to test it out and prove out that actually this is causal. If you do these 3 behaviors, you will make a change. That entire journey was probably a quarter of work. But I think if we had just started flinging things at the wall after seeing this dashboard, we would have had no clue what to really do there. And so we understood what was happening, but we didn't know why. And that's where like the really hard work came in. And so that's like one example of this idea of you got to drill, like Casey, you mentioned this, like 3 levels deeper than what that dashboard is telling you to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Certainly faced some similar challenges at Pinterest and Eventbrite. For Pinterest, one example I'll give is when you are a consumer social company, you're always trying to get to hundreds of millions of users. You're trying to basically sign up the entire internet. And once you get fairly good at acquisition, which we did at Pinterest, the question becomes how many of them are going to stick around. So the biggest concern at Pinterest was the activation rate of people we did sign up, especially outside of the US, which was a much lower number than inside the US. So we had to do a bunch of work across many different parts of our funnel to try to understand how we could get that number as high as possible, assuming we eventually would sign up most of the world. We retain them like Facebook or we retain them like Twitter because those are very different numbers. So, of course, the first thing we did is we looked at the data and we found a bunch of things that correlated to users finding success. But then we also paired that with research. We went to those countries, we watched people, sign up and use the product, and we watched why they failed. And that generates a long list of hypotheses, but you don't know if the insights you're getting from your data are causal or correlative. You have to start testing. And I think a lot of people hear the output of some of the experiments like my team or Adam's teams have done in the past and all the impact they have. And what they don't hear in the blog post is that the first few experiments failed. Like they didn't generate, the impact. So one of the correlations we saw in our data at Pinterest was people searched in the first session, they had a much higher activation rate. So we built an entire onboarding experience that prioritized search. Massive failure. Because it turned out that people who sought out search had something to search for. But if you put the search bar directly in front of people who don't have something to search, they kind of don't know how to move forward in the product. But we did see other correlations that did turn out to be causal. If people save in the first session, they're more likely to retain. And so we built an experiment that kind of forced people to save. That didn't work either. But it gave us the insight that if we actually teach people why saving is valuable, and then as an output of that, they save in the first session, that potentially could work. And that was a big input. So over a year and a half, the activation rate at Pinterest doubled. And there are like 7 different experiments that moved that needle, up and to the right, ultimately doubling the activation rate. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work, some of them had big impact, some of them had small impact, but it's this data research feedback loop and a lot of failure and learning from that failure along the way that ultimately creates, a very large impact for the company.
You mentioned 2 really, I think, important points, the way we see that it looks. One is around, Casey, you touched on this kind of infrastructure issues. The data is never perfect. We always say that, okay, the data, it's an ongoing project. It's never perfect. The question is,
the data team was actually canceled shortly after I joined Pinterest because it just wasn't working, and then we rebooted it later.
Okay, that's an extreme case, but it's never perfect. But on the other hand, what we also see as a pitfall, which I think worth mentioning, is that companies are kind of trying to move to the second step before actually completing the first one. The first one for me is the data monitor, data visibility, creating a kind of a data infrastructure that enables you to see like what's going on. These are like the kind of surface level dashboards. But if you don't trust the data, and we have worked with various companies that if you don't trust the data, if you don't track most of what's going on inside your product, let's say in cases where we had 60-70% of the features are not tracked at all, don't expect your team to bring those insights. So the data, like it's a fine line here, but just get to a place where like you get to the data visibility, data monitor place before you can move to the data driven kind of.
This is a great point. I can give a quick example on that. So of course, when I joined Pinterest, it was a mid-stage startup. Of course, we didn't track everything perfectly by the time I got there. And one kind of joke that I share within the growth community is to understand how healthy your data stack is, how many lines of SQL is it to write a query that gives you an accurate signups per day number? Because it turns out you always have to add these extra weird things to actually get something that's useful. So yeah, again, like this is never going to be super accurate. And in the case of Pinterest and trying to drive that activation rate up, there are a bunch of features that we just didn't know how they impacted usage, retention. So as a growth team, we had to go instrument those features and turn them off for some new users to see how they actually impacted activation rate and retention rate. And what we found is that turns out simplifying the product and deleting some of these features that are of marginal value can be a thing that makes the product easier to use and improves activation rate. So we actually ended up deleting some of these features, but in order to prove that, we had to go back and instrument them, then run an A/B test where some people are shown it, some people aren't shown it. And it's almost like a relaunch of the feature by taking it away. And you're always going to have to do stuff like that if you're a growing business, because no one's got perfect data hygiene. No one's got perfect data infrastructure when they start a startup like that. That would be a silly investment to make before you know you've got product market fit.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, great segue for I think for our next kind of like. So we talked about the reason why companies kind of like failing to move to this step. One question that I think was also raised across among our audience, and by the way, guys, I see your question and we'll include them, incorporate them in the next few kind of minutes as we skim through the different topic. One question which was mentioned a lot is, how do you know? How do you know that I'm actually failing? I'm not a data-driven company. Like, when we meet companies at Looks and during the industry, everyone perceives themselves as a data-driven company, right? Like, why are we even talking about those things? For everyone think about it, yet we are here and everyone agrees that that's kind of like a challenge. Casey, I think you said it yourself, that everyone went through this kind of process. So how do you know? What are the signals, the indicators that you are actually like, you are not moving towards the right direction when it comes to actionable insights?
Yeah, I think I'll answer this with a couple of thoughts and then kick it over to Casey. I think one underlying thing is you're doing a lot of work, you're shipping a lot of stuff, and you're just not seeing the business change in any way. That tells me that you are prioritizing. If you're looking at data, then you're prioritizing looking at the wrong stuff, or the stuff you're looking at is not particularly actionable, or it's more performative than anything else. So that's sort of like one is that. Another is like how you are monitoring and acting on things. If every time a number changes slightly, no one really knows why, and it kicks off this whole ad hoc analysis process, et cetera, then you're not really integrating data with your company. You are instead reacting to things, and you're not observing trends over time. And so one of the things that you want to do is move to meaningful alerts and watching trends to see if that one day change is actually anything that really matters. But yeah, those are some of the other things. And then I guess one last thing is, it is easy to get excited by a dashboard. It gives you this illusion of activity. You're thinking, hey, look, people are doing things on our site. Well, the question is like, yeah, people are always doing things on your site, but are you rewarding the fact that you're able to just monitor that or track that? Or are you actually rewarding somebody saying, hey, I observed this behavior and this is interesting and here's what I think about it? Or just the fact that there's a pretty dashboard that exists that shows you something silly like real-time site activity or something like that.
Yeah, I think those are great points. A couple of things I would add is how much of the time that you're working with data is analyzing versus reporting to other people. You see a lot of companies where they do a whole lot of work. They do a whole bunch of, spreadsheet work or, PowerPoint work, and they don't feel like they got anything out of it. They feel like they're doing it just so they check the box so that the CEO trusts them or their manager trusts them. So what proportion of that work is kind of data busy work versus actually informing your strategy, what you want to build next, how you want to change, what you're doing, I think is something to really keep in mind of if you're moving towards more, a data-driven culture. The other thing is, and I saw this at Eventbrite when I joined, is, oh, we shipped this and we did our checklist of the analysis we're supposed to do when we ship something. And then my immediate response was like, that checklist didn't tell us anything. So are you doing the work to learn something, or are you doing the work to kind of check a box as part of a process? And you should be able to look, there are some times where you're going to be like, oh, I went 10 levels deep and I just could not find the answer. Therefore, the answer is seasonality. I don't know. That will happen. Like, you're not always going to get the perfect golden nugget at the end of the rainbow, but you should at least be trying when your first analysis doesn't give you much, to pull the thread deeper and see if you can find really kind of the root cause or the key insight. So if you only ever do that first level, you generally never get something that can inform what you want to do next and be smarter about where you're going.
I look at also the Q&A, the comments, and one kind of, and we actually discussed it like preparing for this webinar, but a kind of a repeating theme is around, let's say, culture, executive management. I think, and a question, like a keyword here, one of the questions was alignment between the teams. Like, it feels like kind of like, and you mentioned it, I think, Casey and like before, around how we create this kind of culture of rewarding. I think Gustav also asked about it. I see in the Q&A around how do you reward kind of like getting insight that actually move the needle, because we need budget, we need resources to do that. So I will talk about the processes, the frameworks, and like the best practices, the way thing, but it seems like such a kind of hot topic that maybe it's a good way to start with. Like, how do you deal with this? Because I think there was a Q&A here, like a question here that was like, yeah, when Adam says that, I'm just kind of rephrasing it. It sounds like easy. There is a great alignment between everyone around the importance of those things, but the reality is harder. So what's your kind of take on that, Adam?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's never really perfect alignment across all these different functions. Like, that's a bit of a pipe dream. You're always going to have some teams that are working on things that are sort of in their own best interest. That's just the nature of it. I think where you need alignment is in the goals of the company and the objectives that are handed down to these different teams. When you have shared goals between marketing or product or sales, it's amazing what actually gets done when everyone is rewarded in the same direction, right? When they share sort of the same results expectation, then people are forced to work together. And so the most effective way that I've seen that work is when you take a slice of the marketing function, a slice of the product function, and you say, hey, you all are working on the same stuff generally. You're both responsible for new customers coming in and being successful in this product. Guess what? You now have the same goals. Go figure out how you're going to spend your time together to work on this. And unless you're hitting those goals, none of you are successful. So like, I don't care if it's the product team didn't do a thing or the marketing team, like, nope, none of you are successful. But this has to come from the leadership team. And if you're not getting it from the leadership team, then you, the person on the individual team, have to find that one leader, that one executive that is going to care about this stuff. My opinion is it's usually the finance person, because at the end of the day, the dollars and cents are what really matter to the company. You get them excited about it. They're usually the CEO's right-hand person. You can start to cascade and create excitement across the other folks, because they're doing a lot of the board reporting and things like that. So
and they control the budget for those other executives.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. So yeah, so that's my take. But look, just like perfect data infrastructure, perfect everything is in sync is kind of a pipe dream, and it's a lifelong journey. So is perfect alignment across all of these teams. I think better to get mostly good alignment, and then the rest of the stuff on the margins doesn't matter as much. So yeah, that's my take on this, and it is hard.
Yeah, I think cross-functional teams and cross-functional shared OKRs is probably the biggest unlock for growth teams in particular, and certainly something that I preach to every company that I advise or operate in. I'll answer Gustav's question in kind of a slightly different take of kind of, okay, your current executive's not rewarding this. And I think that's the default of what you should expect of most companies. So what you want to be doing is saying, to get this executive what they want over time, here are some process changes that will make you more effective in being able to do that, and kind of move the needle slowly over time towards a future state you want to get to. You can't go into the company and be like, Captain Kirk, like, your God is wrong. You have to say hey, well, if we move it this direction, I can make this thing happen. I can make this thing happen. And so I think one of the things I did at Pinterest, in addition to writing out the strategies, writing out the OKRs for the growth team, is go into some of those meetings with execs that's like engineering, product, marketing, the CEO, who I know haven't seen all of this before, and just say hey, here's how I think this can work better. And if you don't trust me, here's the data from other companies you trust that also do it this way. Because, executives tend to trust opinions outside the building more than inside the building. This shouldn't be the way, but it just is. So go get that data from peer company that, the executives respect. So, it's as a head of growth, I would say 50% of my time became work like that. Aligning core product teams, aligning analytics teams on what we're trying to do, explaining why we're trying to do it, getting buy-in, from, the CEO, the head of product. And I probably should have done more, honestly. So I think that's a surprise to people in these situations, is how much time they're doing to kind of preach the gospel iteratively on where they want to go to have more impact. And then when you start having that impact and other teams don't, the executives start asking wait, why is the growth team having so much more predictable impact than these people shipping features over here? It's oh, they use data. They have a learning feedback loop. Why aren't we getting that over here? And then you could be surprised how much you can change the overall company, but that's over years long cycles, right? It's not going to happen in 3 months, right? You have to be patient and iteratively work your way into trust, into impact. More impact creates more trust, things like that.
Great. Let's, in a way, you kind of we started talking about it, but let's just kind of make it even more practical. I think that the other type of question that we're also getting in the Q&A and before the session is around, okay, we understand that companies, many companies, are failing. Actually, based on what I was hearing from you, I guess we can agree that all of us are failing in making, translating the company into data-driven kind of decision-making process to some extent. So let's talk about practical kind of tools, frameworks, processes, meetings, tools that you have, ceremonies that you do, any kind of I don't know, kind of pitfalls that to avoid. Let's talk about, I think we discussed it in events 10 or even more concrete kind of things that you from the companies that you manage, and I believe you manage actually product teams, data teams, growth teams, so you had the chance to experience all of them. how do we make sure, how we instill this kind of data-driven culture inside the organization? What are the things, the actual things that you did in your weekly, monthly, quarterly routine?
Yeah, I can kick off with one. So one process that we created at Pinterest and I brought to Eventbrite that's been very successful is something called a results review, which is when you ship something, could be an experiment, could be a new feature, whatever the case may be, you put something on the calendar at the time where you expect to have collected enough data to learn what happened. That thing is on the calendar. In that meeting, the cross-functional team that worked on that, which is usually some combination of engineer, design, data, maybe marketing, come back and say, remember, we made this change. Here's what happened. Here's what we learned. And here's what we want to do about it. We want to ship it to everyone. If it was an experiment, we want to iterate on it because there's something here, but we didn't quite unlock it. Or we want to kill it. Our hypothesis was totally wrong. And you're not allowed to move on to a totally new thing until you've closed the book on that current thing. And the other element is you're not allowed to move on to the current thing unless you cleaned up the mess you created with that last thing, tech debt, design debt, all those kind of things, because those are other things that can slow teams down from having impact, but also, you can get tech debt in your data infrastructure too. So that was a big unlock for us because it forces people to really answer the question of what happened, what do we learn, and how does it inform what we do moving forward. It forces you to practice the muscle of data analysis for any change you make to the product or to your marketing strategy, things like that. So that's a big one that's like fairly simple, but can be pretty powerful over time. I'll give it to Adam for some other ideas.
Yeah, there's, in addition to results reviews, which I absolutely love, and I feel like every team should be doing a results review. There's a couple of practices around doing weekly business reviews and quarterly business reviews that are super beneficial. And so in a weekly business review, you're bringing you're establishing some dashboarding that's designed to monitor trends in major metrics that matter to the outcomes of the business. So that might be something like the activation rate or sign up rate or whatever. You can extrapolate this from your growth model and say, these are the key pinch points that we care about. Let's watch how these go over time. What you're doing is then you're assigning responsibility to those different things. And so if you do this meeting on, say, a Tuesday morning, well, when everyone gets in the office on Monday, they should be aware of what's happening with these trends, and they should be prepared to talk about them on Tuesday. And if nothing is happening, we move on past that metric. And it's not just the analyst that is talking about this. In fact, it's actually the wrong person to be talking about it. The analyst should be enabling the infrastructure and the output of the reporting and things like that. It's the product manager, it's the growth marketing manager, it's even the engineering manager that should be saying, hey, we own the results here. We are the ones who are going to be talking about this. We are the ones who are bringing the what is going on and why is it happening. So that's sort of one. That's a weekly business review. I've written a little bit about this in my newsletter. And then on the quarterly business review, you can actually bring it together from a larger group. And I think one of the pitfalls that people do in quarterly business reviews is it's just a rehashing of, here's all the stuff we did in the quarter. Output, huzzah, look at all this motion. You don't actually want to focus on the what happened. That's actually sort of a footnote. You want to focus more on the why and what we learned and things like that, because that's actually the stuff that's most valuable to all the other people in the room. And that's a very expensive meeting. So if you're doing a quarterly business review, yeah, do the high level of here's how we did last quarter, but spend most of the time on why are we seeing these things? And then what are we doing next about it? What do we expect to do in the subsequent quarter? So those are a couple pieces of advice I have on the business review side of things.
Yeah, we ran ours the exact same way at both Pinterest and Eventbrite. And when you get really good at this and you have a clear owner, as Adam is talking about, for these key metrics, then you can work with like a finance team and analytics team to forecast what you expect them to look like and how the things you're working on are expected to inflect them. And, then it becomes faster to diagnose when they're off track, why they're off track. I think that's really, really valuable. A couple other things I would mention here is how teams think about analytics. So Adam touched on something really important here, which is the owner of that metric, who's on the product team or the marketing team, they should be able to, most of the time, answer these questions by themselves around why a metric is moving. Analytics is more of like a SWAT team that comes in for the heavy hitting analysis when, you just can't figure it all out on your own. So I think not saying, oh, well, I need to go talk to an analyst to learn anything about this metric. It's like, no, why aren't you more self-serve in your ability to do this? So one of the things we did at Pinterest is we said, if you're on the product team, if you're on the support team, you're learning SQL, you're writing all your own SQL queries to get this information, out of our data warehouse. Later on, we built more dashboards and, great internal tools for that type of stuff. But for the first few years, it's like, no, we expect you to become data independent if you want to be successful at this company. And it turns out SQL's like the easiest thing to learn. Hard to master, but fairly easy to learn. And now, with all these AI tools, it's going to be even way easier to write effective SQL. But just saying like that, hey, that's a fundamental expectation of the job. I think 99 out of 100 companies Adam and I have worked on, people want more analysts than currently exist. And it's hard to find analysts that are actually excellent at their job. So being deliberate around where the analytics horsepower should be put inside the company if you're short, what projects you feel like are going to need more of that horsepower, and making sure that analyst is embedded in just that team versus this is a pooled resource for everyone, I think is better, because then they just end up being SQL writers. They don't know anything about the strategy. They can't really generate the most powerful insight because they're not embedded in the team. So just embed them in the most important team if you can't have them everywhere. Everyone else, learn SQL, be self-sufficient. Maybe go beg engineer or analyst for help if you really get stuck. I think is better than just having them be like a pooled resource that, doesn't have like a deep enough insight to like really help the team at the most valuable level. Those are some things I think about. And then, investing in the onboarding and training of analysts so they really know how to diagnose issues, and then probably make that same training available to product and marketing teams so that they get better at doing their own deep dive analysis. Are they going to be as good as the analysts at the company? Probably not. But they can get a lot better than, generally when they join a company, if you just make a little bit of investment upfront, in their onboarding on what it means to write a good SQL query, what it means to isolate a variable correctly, things like that.
Yeah, let me add one more thing to that, which is like a practical example. So when I was at Patreon, I thought we did a really good job of democratizing the knowing how to do the things and get the data out of our systems. We used Amplitude, a product like Loops will help with this too. But we had regular trainings that we would bring in somebody from outside the company, from one of these vendors. We would organize a group of people. We would collect questions and some of the analyses that they were trying to figure out how to do on their own. And we would literally run workshops maybe once a quarter or every sort of 6 to 8 weeks. And they were super valuable because what you want to teach people a couple of things. One, you really can't mess this up. If you click here and you click here, you're not going to take the website down using the analytics tool. It's going to be okay. Two is you can always ask for help, but try to get yourself most of the way there. And learning by doing is the best recipe, I think. The number of SQL queries I've written where I'm like, I have no idea if this is asking the right question. And then I go to an analyst or I go to one of the data science team members and I'm like, hey, can you tell me, like, is this good? A lot of times they're like, yeah, but you can do it in about 1/3 of the lines. And so I'm learning, right? Maybe I'm never going to get there, but like, I'm getting feedback and I'm learning a new skill. But that's a really important thing, is build in regular training. That's a thing that you can make as part of the analyst or the data team responsibility. Is your job is to democratize and train new people and refresh existing team members on how to do the things that are most important for them.
Yeah, we had a data office hours twice a week. at both Pinterest and Eventbrite, and I can guarantee you I booked the most hours at those office hours, probably by a very, very clear margin.
You know, you both said like something that for me is not trivial at all. And when I want to double click on that, I'm really curious to know what the audience kind of thinks about that. But basically, well, Casey, you said that like out loud, you need to know SQL. And the first thing I personally meet, I would say dozens of growth product and marketeers every week. And the first complaint when I ask him about the pain points is that we don't have enough analytics resources. We have questions, it's like kind of in a ticket kind of based system, and we get answers to this question like, I don't know, weeks after, it's not relevant by then. And I'm not able to operate, and I cannot be data driven when like that's kind of like the asking kind of process. And you're kind of saying, okay, like go and learn SQL. I wonder if that's what you're first that's what like the audience thinks about, but it's not trivial. Let's kind of like admit it for a second, because most of the still, I don't have the numbers, but I think last time I checked, let's say 60-70% of those folks that I mentioned don't know SQL.
Yeah.
Each person can have its own opinion, but that's not a trivial thing to say.
It's true. It's not trivial. And I would say a couple of things about it. If you don't build even rough skills in this area, you will eventually get to a place where you are completely roadblocked by lack of data. That could be going super early at a company that just doesn't have this information, and that's the only way to get it. But if you want to be successful in your career, being able to get this information is critical, even if it's not a blocker at your current company. And actually, at your current company is a great place to learn, because you probably have very capable people to teach you. The other thing that I would say is a lot of times when people are like, I just have so many questions and I can't get it, we don't have enough analysts, I would actually tell them, maybe you could cut about half of those questions because they're completely useless. The answer to them isn't actually going to do anything for you. It's like, how many additional ways do you need to segment or slice and dice? And the answer is like, there's a limit to that. And I think, again, it's easy for people to go through analysis paralysis, because asking for an analysis is not a hard thing to do. Acting on an analysis is. And so even if the data analyst, even if you had an infinite supply and they returned an answer to every single question that you asked, would you be able to then act on the answers to those questions? Probably not. So I challenge people to think through what is truly going to lead to a testable hypothesis, what is truly going to influence our growth model, and stop just asking questions, again, for the sake of motion over progress.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things that I think those are really good points. Having to answer the question yourself makes you actually prioritize the analytics questions. And that's very important, because then you'll just deluge, analytics team. So there's a couple things I would add. Part of the reason Adam and I learned SQL is we went to early stage startups and the data was nowhere else. Amplitude didn't exist as a company, nor did Mixpanel when I joined Grubhub. So like literally the first week, I'm like, how do I get this data? And I came from apartments.com, which had like Website Story and Omniture, those types of tools. Of course, Grubhub didn't have any of that. So like, it's in the database, go learn SQL. So I went to W3 schools. I spent a couple weeks going through all those exercises, wrote a bunch of crappy queries, had an engineer review them, got better, iterated on that loop for, basically, a decade to get pretty proficient, right? And of course, now there are tools like loops, which means you're going to have to write SQL less. But I wouldn't say like, you shouldn't ever need to build that skill. But it's not like learning Python. It's not like learning Java. It's a lot easier than that. Just go spend a little bit of time. You'll be surprised at how much more data independent it makes you quite quickly. So that's one point. Second point is when you are not getting the right support from analytics teams, which does happen, either they have this pooled model where you submit a ticket, you get something 3 weeks later, it's wrong or not relevant anymore. Part of your job is to try to influence how that structure works through the channels that you have, right? So at Pinterest, I wasn't very happy with the analytics support I was getting on the growth team. So you know what I did? I went to the head of analytics and I said, my head count is yours for the next 6 months. I'm not going to hire any more PMs until I get this analytics support. And here are the types of analyses I'm not getting done that would help the growth team more effective that I expect you to hire for. So I'm not just saying like, analytics, why aren't you hiring more people? I'm saying analytics, I got you the budget to hire more people because I'm just literally transferring this line item over to you. That's how much I need your help. And here's what I want you to test for. I will do the interviews if you're short on the interview cycles. And here's the list of prioritized work. And to Adam's point, here's the stuff I would know how to do if I got these answers much more quickly and the impact that would create for the team. And you know what? We hired those analysts after I gave them the headcount because they might be fighting an internal battle where they don't know how to value analytics to the finance team or whatever. If I already got my PM headcount and I just gave it to them, you know, then they're off to the races. So again, you might not be able to be as direct as I was in that particular example, but there's generally things you could do yourself or through your boss to morph the analytics team to the type of support you want, away from a ticket-based system to someone that's a little bit more embedded, or to be able to hire a few more of them. And it's worth grinding on that to get, you know, better outcomes for your team. Or better tooling, right? Like a lot of times, the point is like, we need to go invest in more tools, and I need to find the budget for that. Even though it's technically an analytics tool, I'm finding the budget in product, I'm finding the budget in marketing. That's another way to do it.
Cool. I'm conscious of time, and we have a few questions that we probably wanna address. But kind of like before moving to the questions, basically what I'm hearing from you is like the biggest, like the most important things to actually become data-driven, except for the fact that you need to know SQL to some extent, is like that it's really you mentioned the weekly business review or the like quarterly, which by the way I can, I should reiterate on this part. The biggest thing that we've seen in our research is effective weekly business review or quarterly business reviews, and like spending the right time and the right procedures and the right processes in this part. You talked about managing the alignment and the relationship, and like I think setting expectations with the other counterparts. Are there other things that we kind of like before moving on that like these are the crucial things that you need to have in order to become kind of to move from the data visualization part to the data-driven level before we move on?
Yeah, well, a couple of things that I would add to that is, and Casey mentioned this all the way at the beginning, which is around like OKRs and roadmaps. If your OKRs if your key results are ship the thing, then you are not a data-driven organization. It is okay for periods of time to have, ship the thing is what needs to happen this quarter. And then the thing needs to do X, Y, and Z metric next quarter. And that's how we know we're successful. And it's a 2-quarter project, basically, or whatever. If you don't have numbers and metrics and those sorts of targets in your key results, you're not going to be operating as a data-driven organization. That's just like fundamentally not going to happen. And you have to model as an executive team. Executive teams have to model that behavior across the organization. And if you aren't seeing your executive team doing that, ask them, how does what we're working on impact the finances of our business? And if they can't answer that, they probably will at least have their eyes open to the fact that they can't answer that. So that's another one that I would say. And then the last thing is just, I don't know if we have any leaders on this call, but the system of rewards that you have in your company, what defines the career ladder of a successful product manager, a successful marketer, a successful, to a lesser extent, salesperson, if that reward system doesn't include being able to generate insights and act on those insights, then I think you're failing the team members that you have in your company. And so building that in doesn't have to be the only thing, but you have to have some aspect of data analysis and insight built into the career ladders of your employees, because that is the another way that you're going to get them focused on it. If they say, oh, my career success depends on being good at this.
Okay, that's great addition. Let's I think we have like 6 more minutes, and we have a few questions from the audience that we wanna want to cover. So we're going to be kind of quick answers. I'm just going to take them one by one. Casey, which tools you need good data analysts should have? Like, which tools are you kind of like thinking about?
Yeah, good question. So, generally when thinking about like a modern infrastructure for analytics, like you're building on top of a data warehouse that allows you to easily access data, right? Most of the time that's like a snowflake, these days, right? And then there's generally some flexibility on the infrastructure you build around that can be stylistic in its approach. There are data visualization tools that sit on top of that, and there are many of them, right? Kind of like looker mode type things out there, right? There are product analytics tools, Loops being the most proactive in terms of trying to generate just the insight instead of just like pour through a bunch of data. Then there are more proactive tools that can help processes inside teams. Most of these are like fairly early stage and a little bit unproven. Adam and I mostly built this stuff via Google Sheets, but now there's starting to be a lot of tools come out. The head of growth at Slack just launched a new tool for this. So there's some exciting stuff coming out that can help analysts and work with PMs better and work with marketers better. But I think the core is you want to have tools where you can track your key KPIs. You can build that on top of their warehouse directly, or you can have a tool that's a little bit more everything's hand tagged sort of deal, like a product analytics tool. You want to have a place where you can easily write ad hoc queries and get insights and publish them for the deep dive. And you don't generally need much more than that, right? So, and then anything that can save the amount of time you need to get that, like Loops just generating a hypotheses of insights to go tackle directly is great. And I think we'll see more tools coming out that help close the gap of time, given the changes in AI, which is really exciting.
Perfect. You mentioned insights that move the needle. I mentioned that. You also talked about that. How can we, that's a tough question, but let's try to keep it kind of tight. How can we know if an insight's worth pursuing in the first place? We probably need to spend an hour on that question, but let's keep it kind of like short.
Yeah, I'll rattle off a couple of things. First is start with your question. Don't start with an insight, right? Like, what are the questions what's getting in the way of something working on the site? Start there. And then what you derive from that probably is actionable. That's sort of number one. Number two is in the beginning, you actually don't necessarily know if the insight is worthwhile. You don't know if it's causal. You have to test that out and test it as quickly as you can. And the more that you do, the better you get at identifying which insights are actually worthwhile, and the sort of narrower your aperture gets in terms of what's going to be successful. And so that it's an iterative process. You don't just wake up on day one and go, aha, I know how to pick insights out of a hat. You have to test it out, and you have to kind of like build your confidence in those insights.
Yeah, agreed. Right. So if you get like, either an output of Loops of a bunch of ideas, or, you did a survival analysis with your data scientist or something, you're going to get a bunch of things that correlate to success, perhaps in one type of analysis. And, some of those will prove to be causal. If you experiment on them, some of them will prove not to be causal, and you apply your intuition to that list to prioritize it. And as Adam mentioned, your intuition is going to get stronger and stronger the more experiments you run. But I just wanted to baseline, like an experiment success rate on a growth team is like 20 to 40%. Like most of the experiments you run aren't going to move the needle. But out of those 20 to 40% that work, they should start moving the needle pretty dramatically, over time. So like the default case is still a lot of failure, even when you're being data driven. Especially at scale, but it always leads you towards stronger intuition, bigger impact as you work through that learning feedback loop.
You mentioned a few times correlation, causation. There are a few things, that's a topic that's really dear to my heart. That's what we do at Loops. One thing is to actually run an A/B test, but also we are actually leveraging causal inference model to actually find what drives your conversion, retention, engagement. By the way, that's something that like an approach that was adopted in the last 2 years, 3 years by Google, Netflix, Uber, LinkedIn, and so on. So there are other ways to identify causality in the data, just versus just pure correlation. Another question that came from Yoel is that, can you please share some insights around how to measure activation beyond just signals that tell you that user understood the product value?
You know who should answer this one is the guy who created the retention and engagement program for Reforge. I think he's on this call.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that one, Adam. But our point of view at Reforge is that activation is only complete when people build a habit out of using your product, which means if you're doing a cohort analysis where there's some sort of activity metric on the y-axis and a frequency metric on the x-axis, and you have a cohort that flattens out, it's at the point where the cohort flattens and you stop losing people, that people have really built a habit, they understand the value, and they're going to keep doing it. So a lot of what we teach in the retention engagement course is how to measure that and how to move more people to that point, so you're actually raising what that cohort analysis graph looks like. And then the quick TLDR on that is you work backwards from people who built the habit, right? What did they do? And generally one of the things you'll find is they experienced the core product value the first time and then started wanting to experience it a lot of times. So then you get into, how do I measure the core product value? How do I measure the first time experiences it? We call that the aha metric. And generally what you'll find is the product and the user have to do a certain amount of work to unlock that core product value for them. And we call that the setup moment and the setup metric. So then what we do in teams is we identify, okay, what's that habit moment? What's that aha moment? What's the setup moment? How do we track all of those really well? And how do we get more people to do each of those things? And that gradually raises the activation rate and the cohort curve, of all your new user cohorts moving forward. Obviously, there's 6 weeks of material on this that I helped build. So I tried to TLDR it as best I could, but hopefully that's helpful.
Cool.
Helpful for me.
Sorry?
I said it was helpful for me.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so we'll do like the three last questions. Reading recommendations on identifying worthwhile insights. Do you have any reading recommendations around like how to identify insights that move the needle? That's a tough one.
Oof. I would be wary of just like we mentioned this cargo culting. I would be wary of cargo culting people's insights. I think there are certain psychological principles that you can extract that are uniformly applicable to all humans, but it is better to read about how to set up to develop insights than it is to cherry pick other people's insights from other companies and try to adopt them as your own. So I would really caution people against that thinking in that way.
Yeah, cool. I agree. Well, just one thing I would add is if you're a larger team, bring in qualitative researcher into that cross-functional team that's working on that project. They are a bit better trained on how to get the right insights from talking to humans, that then can feed back into a stronger feedback loop, especially when you combine it with the data analysis.
Great. How can we overcome situation when correlation might be misleading? Well, I talked about that. Like we are actually leveraging those causal models. Other kind of like tips from you?
I think that's a really good one. I think experimentation is another one. Those are kind of the biggies in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Tom knows more about this than pretty much anyone else in the world, but you can always go deeper on the statistical side to try to isolate the impacts of things, and you can get into some really fancy analysis. And obviously tools that help us do that quicker, like loops, are very, very appreciated by us product leaders. But also just a lot of times to get the data you need, go ship something and see what happens. And a lot of times that's kind of the missing piece to give you exactly, what you need. What you ship might have failed entirely, but it gives you the clear answer to what's not going to fail and what's actually going to help your company and product succeed.
Great. Guy was the first one to ask question, and we haven't addressed these questions around like your Patreon example, Adam. So maybe we can end with this one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the example that Guy's referring to is how we got to this insight around the kind of plateau and what drives it and what to do about that. And yeah, the approach that we took was data analysis to identify that something problematic was going on, manual review and surveying and qualitative insights to understand what was actually driving that data behavior, and then actually having conversations one-on-one with people to provide even more color and to kind of understand if certain solutions and things that we wanted to try might be popular amongst those groups. And so you don't necessarily have to follow that whole process, right? You can continue drilling down. But I think for something as significant as what we were undertaking and how little we knew about it, we had to do all the things. But yeah, continue drilling like a level deeper and a level deeper. And if you're not blending some qualitative, some why with the data, the what, then you're probably going to have a lower rate of success. And so that would be my advice, is to balance both of those things.
Great. Phil asked about like if Loops increases success rate of growth teams. That's exactly what we do. Like in my Google days, if we had 20% success rate, we were happy. We are actually going towards 3x, 4x. So exactly what we do. And I think we can end up with that. So Adam, Casey, thank you so much for your time. If any of kind of like the participants want to talk about data-driven decision-making and the illusion of that, like feel free to reach out to ping us. We are at getloops.ai. And in the meantime, thank you, Casey and Adam. It was great, fantastic insights. And have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for having us, Tom. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.